Dr. Chic Canfora, who will be joining us in just a couple of seconds, and she will do the, there we go, and who's uniquely suited for our times as a guest, I will say. And I'm particularly grateful that she was able to be with us today. Welcome to the show, and pardon me while I put away my robot. This is my.
I'm sorry I missed that segment. I had
Oh,
a meeting, a
oh
mandatory
yeah.
meeting, but caught the tail end of it and wish I'd seen the whole thing. So I'll have to watch it on. Uh, uh, have to watch the recorded version.
Yeah, well, yeah. Rob and I are. We started having these conversations about AI and robotics and where the near future is heading, and then I was like, we have to talk about this in front of other people because people need to know. They need to know what's occurring because it's on us already in so many ways. But
Yeah.
there's an acceleration happening, and you have to just be ready for it. You have to we like I had a friend in Chicago who was like, I'm never getting a cell phone. Why would I want people to call me all the time? Like, in the mid 90s, he's like, still had a beeper, and there are people like that. I get it. But then the rest of the world just kind of moves on and we adapt to it. And for better or worse, we adapt it and then we move through it. Because I would argue, and this kind of leads into what we're talking about, is that the uh, social media can be both a blessing and a curse when it comes to activism or marches or those kind of thing, because not only can make it easier for people to put together a relatively spontaneous march or those kind of things, but it can also help bad actors and provocateurs and other people infiltrate and find their way into it, because you don't have to show up at a meeting sitting in a room on a campus discuss where people can really get a vibe off of you, whether you're a true believer or you're there for the cause, or if you're there to really start crap. So um for
Well, it's hard to believe that in the 60s we were able to mobilize half a million people to go to Woodstock, or
yeah.
hundreds of thousands to assemble in DC for an anti-war protest
Hmm.
with long distance phone calls and snail mail. No, I mean, we would have given anything to have social media in those
Right.
days.
Well, and in many ways, parts of it would have made it a lot easier, but parts of it would have been easier to track and undermine, and that because there's an expectation of doing it overtly, and we've got splinter groups within the larger groups that maybe would have petered out and not achieved a level of violence, perhaps because they couldn't get enough people on board, that might just be two or three of them, but because they talk to people online that may or may not even be in the area, much less in the same country, that will go, yeah, you should. That gives them enough to push them to act in a violent way, as if they're really being cheered on by people who really care about the cause. So that's one of in the cost benefit analysis of communication, the the connection and the speed of it absolutely can be a great tool, but the anonymity of it and the lack of clarity on whether somebody actually does care about the things you care about, or I mean, even the right deals with this. They think everybody in Patriot Front's a Fed because they cover their faces and they don't know who's who, right? But all those guys are all insulted all the time. Not enough to show their faces apparently, but whatever. That's the tough part, right?
Right. It is. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, but I see a lot of people using social media for, like we said, the good and the bad of it. And
Mm-hmm.
boy, you've been busy this week. I've been tuning
Yeah.
into. There's so much to talk about,
Oh.
and so much of it's becoming fast-paced off of social media. It's truly exhausting to try to
Mm-hmm.
keep up with it. And being a professor that teaches media literacy, it's just it takes so much time to weed through the propaganda and the BS and
Yeah.
get to what's really happening that you can actually make intelligent, informed decisions about.
Right. Well, discernment becomes a key tool in your arsenal, knowing what's worth paying attention to and what isn't, and getting a good radar for what's, a genuine piece of breaking news that might be concerning, needs attention, might need you to call your reps or march, and then a piece of just noisy blather. The first lady came out this morning. I don't know if you saw it, and gave this little speech that she's been talking to Vladimir Putin, and he's agreed with her that the children that have been taken in Russian to Russia from Ukraine, which by the way there are 60 to 70,000 at last count. That he's taking that their lives very seriously, and he's facilitated in the last 24 hours the return of 8 of them, one of whom was allegedly taken by Ukraine from Russia, which is just ridiculous. 8. And like she came out to make this announcement, and they're doing it because there's a combination of things, I think. Look busy because maggots are not impressed. Prices are not coming down. Wages are not going up. Inflation is still an issue. He's starting new wars, right? All that stuff that he said he wouldn't do. He can't solve the ones that he can in a phone call. And even the stuff with the hostage exchange, we've been through this once before. So everybody's hopeful. But a lot of this has to do with these were the same asks the Biden did of Hamas and Israel. And the only difference is 9 to 10 more months of bombing. It just seems like Israel was saying no until they were done, right? That's simply it. Like till they cried uncle. They were just these were always the demands. They just won't happen until you bomb enough. So the idea that he somehow negotiated something is just stupid. Like, okay, we're done. Seems to be what the response was, really. So
the master of the art of the deal, right?
Right.
I mean, like, and throws these stupid things like the big announcement of the first lady that's going to come tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, they're all just little distractions. He's getting beat up in the press a lot for the Russian negotiations in Gaza, the opaque kind of terms of the deal, and the really conspicuous presence of creepy people like Jared Kushner,
Mm-hmm. Making even more of a presence lately. Like it's almost like they kept it under wraps until this deal was made because his presence is so toxic, and would reveal the fact that Trump Plaza Gaza is really what he's planning. And this
having Jared there with Steve Witkoff, it's like this is all about real estate,
beachfront
this is all
property.
about reconstruction, regional development, what should be the hard necessary work of political resolution over there, the humanitarian recovery in that region has all been replaced with the opportunity. The peace deal really is just political theater, and it just seemed that people latched on right away to what is it? There's nothing here. There's no there. And I think he just loves the intrusion of these little things. Oh, Melania is on the phone with Vladimir Putin.
Right. They're really good friends. We talked to them. Yeah, we talked to them. They're golfing buddies. Like that's And by the way, there is breaking news this morning, and we'll find out more, because the Chinese government is so limited in what it puts out. But allegedly, apparently, I don't know which word fits the best. Xi Jinping has had yet another stroke right before the 4th plenary session, and this one might be catastrophic. We'll see if Li Keqiang has to fly back to Beijing to take over, and allegedly he lost control of the military last year when he had a stroke before the 3rd plenary session, and that's where a guy named Zhang Youxia, who runs the military there, started jockeying to be the next de facto leader, because effectively Deng Xiaoping was seen as more like the military leader and became party chairman out of that, and kind of ran. They've had a history of like, we have a party chairman, but the head of the military runs things for real. And so that's an enormous piece of news. And Li Keqiang, the thought is that he'd be more like normalizing, approach, whereas Zhang Youxia is, militaristic in that, right? But he wouldn't attack Taiwan because it would be a waste of resources, and he doesn't believe in its worth. He doesn't have that issue, which is, it's all over the map. But I had said earlier this year, and sorry to interrupt, but this is a bit of breaking news. But I had said earlier this year that if he made it to November, it would shock me. And we're right on target with that. And on top of that, Trump has this picture come out of that the right is saying that he has devil horns on his hands, or that he was sitting in his chair with the eagle behind him and it looked like he had devil horns at his, which is part of the response to his, I don't know, his peace deal, whatever. And then they were showing his hand, which it just, it's gnarly anyways, but a but it looks like he's got diverted veins now, like they've used one up, they've all gone flat on this side of his hand. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
changes are
media does
coming.
have a with his hands and the makeup on his hands, hiding the bruising and things like
Hmm.
that. Um, Boy, the right would have had a field day with anything like that in the Biden
Oh
administration.
yeah.
We should all be concerned about the health of these powerful people that are old, and their ideas are just as old as they are. And it's so encouraging to see a lot of young voices in Gen Z coming
Hmm.
out and with great followings. Adam Mockler and some of those are just
Hmm.
like coming across my phone every day, and it's just so inspiring to see these young people calling out the propaganda, calling out the bullshit,
Sure.
asking, demanding out with the old, in with the young.
Hmm.
Their future that we're talking about, it's their they're going to be in this world and on this planet far longer than we are. And that's what's so exhilarating about being on a college campus every day and just seeing the future right in front of me. And as I'm
Hmm.
so worried about the immediate present, it's just every day, how much more can we take
Right.
of the craziness and I know that you want to talk a little bit about the fact that on our college campus we're getting a lot of attention because people are always making the parallels between
Yes.
activism in the 1960s and the repressive force that was brought against us at Kent State on May 4th,
Mm.
1970, when the Ohio National Guard opened fire on unarmed college students. I mean, I'm holding my breath as I'm watching what's unfolding in Chicago and Portland, but I'm just so inspired by these strong legislators, the mayors, the governors that are
Hmm.
standing up, and even the judicial backlash. And I think, again, Trump's trying to divert away from a really bad news week for him
Yep.
in the courts.
Right.
And so he wants to talk about Melania's phone call with Vladimir Putin. When people are in cities looking around, watching an armed military takeover of their cities, they don't care about what Melania and Putin are talking about on the phone.
Right. Or what they are allegedly talking about on the phone. One, if it's ever happening actually at all, or B, if they're telling you the truth about what's happening, or if this is just, part of their inner working relationship with them and that she's been his Russian handler forever, like in a series of them presented to them, him, by Epstein or Mark Burnett over time. Like here's your new wife handler. When you get bored with the other one, we'll get you a new handler, right? That I mean, honestly, that's been the thought for quite some time when it comes to Melania. In some ways, that she's a conduit by which, some measure of control is and information is exerted over him and information taken. So I guess the issue that uh, I have, and by the way, I will say, like, I don't automatically, and I never have, even when I was a wee one, look to the youth as the solution, because equally there are the Turning Points USA crowd that was there to see Charlie Kirk and actually interact with him when he, at all of his events before he passed away. The ones that are going to the new ones, the Candace Owens and and Nick Fuentes and those people. They're very young. There's plenty of material online for them to watch, and a lot of people spouting what they want to hear. So it's almost 50-50 at this point. Whereas I would argue that in the 90s, youthful, liberal, at least socially liberal values were like 80-20. We're much closer to 50-50. That's one of the reasons why I think young voices have gotten louder lately, is because they have had to. There's actual competition for the words, and they're not only up against the Trump administration, but people their own age who are spouting these kind of things. So I do think, like, wisdom has value over time, and the ability to recognize, what fights are worth having, what long-term things, mattered to you over time versus what may not have when you were younger. And the decisions, we've talked before about how, like, instigating any kind of violence, vandalism, or those kind of things seems logical and right at the time and part of the struggle, but it can lead inexorably to a rising authoritarian pushback on it. And there are cleverer, more irrefutable ways to push back on that. And I think the people in Portland who are like dressing up in inflatable suits and, mocking the whole thing are having more of an impact because it steals the propaganda video from the right wingers who want to say Portland's burning. It's a modern
Yeah.
aspect of this. It's the Instagramming of like of you know revolutionary marching.
Well, I mean, I'm worried that we'll actually see that. I mean, what we saw, and what we learned from the COINTELPRO was when there were agent provocateurs that were actually starting fires of
Hmm.
ROTC buildings. So even at Kent State in 1970, we don't know who burned down the ROTC building, but we have enough evidence that that kind of thing was happening at the hands of agent provocateurs that it gives us at least pause in the absence of any evidence that a student burned it down, that
Hmm.
that false flag was used to justify sending in the Ohio National Guard
Right.
into a situation where the anti-war protests did not warrant anything but immediate, police presence to make
Right.
sure that things didn't get out of hand. Things did not get out of hand, but
Hmm.
students still died at the hands of
Hmm.
National Guard. And a lot of people in the rush to judgment in the days that followed said, what about those rocks and bricks that were thrown? Long before the evidence showed there was nothing being thrown at the guard at the time they shot. Or
Right.
else, what about that fire? What about that building that burned down 2 days before the shootings? As
Right.
if that would be justification for trial by, firing or, firing squad efforts 2 days
Yeah.
later in a random crowd to pay for a building. And if National Guard were sent to protect property and life, all they did was take life and get away with it. And we obviously haven't learned the right lessons from that, or we wouldn't be seeing
Right.
so much of the same inflammatory rhetoric and so much of the same deployment of National Guard troops where they're not needed
Well,
and
I
they
no, I think
don't.
the lesson was learned. I think other presidents learned not to do it. I think in the case of like the L.A. riots, for example, that there was a real hesitancy to do it at one point, but it was so extraordinary, and it wasn't like again a campus situation. It was a section of a city, and parts of it were genuinely on fire, and firemen couldn't reach the areas and those kind of things. That was like an extraordinary circumstance. I think the lesson learned by the Trump administration is precisely the inverse of what you should learn from that thing is that if you do push people and you keep pushing, you just do it long enough, somebody's going to overreach, somebody's going to snap, somebody's going to throw something, and that will give you the excuse to do what you really want to do. That you are, by action, by showing up, being intentionally provocative. That's the purpose of it. It's clearly the purpose. It was clearly a purpose in Los Angeles, and they didn't get anything more than like rocks hitting cars. It's clearly what they're doing in Portland. It's clearly what they're doing in Chicago. They are wanting someone to pop off and shoot someone so that they can have an excuse to return fire and go, see, it was lawless, insurrection act, martial law, and then basically a door knocking campaign. That seems to
Well,
be where Trump's and Stephen Miller wish it would go.
Stephen Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah, the shadow president, Stephen Miller, is he's on fire himself
Mm-hmm.
on talk radio and talk TV, branding any kind of dissent, just people marching with signs or dressing up as
Right.
radical.
Yeah.
Critics of Trump policy are terrorists. American cities are
Yeah.
falsely painted as
War
burning
zones.
to the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just the infusion again, as they did so effectively on January 6th. Talking about Antifa. You know, there is no organized group called Antifa,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it's surfacing again, and radical leftists,
Mm-hmm.
Democratic, extremists, all
Right.
branded domestic terrorists, just to justify military invention for this enemy of the people that
Right.
we're being branded, because we know we have a right in this country still
Mm-hmm.
to get in the street and make our voices heard, to have our presence seen, that we oppose the policies. Look at our signs, look at our numbers, hear what we have to say, that the way that people are being treated unjustly in this country is not okay in this city. And so they know that it's
Mm-hmm.
going to happen in places like Chicago and places like Portland and places like DC and LA. And as Trump said in that spectacle before the admirals and generals, that these are training
Mm-hmm.
grounds for a full U.S. military invasion of our cities and states, probably right before the midterms, to
Hmm.
declare martial law and put an end to any opportunity we have to replace these people that are perpetrating these authoritarian tactics in America.
Well, and again, largely they are limited by the laws on the books and the reality that because no matter what, it seems like Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal was was tossed, which means the other co-conspirators that were listed in the indictment and anybody else can now be prosecuted in other states. Which means that was basically tore up by the Supreme Court by not seeing it and allowing her prosecution to go through. That's Trump's world smashing up against gravity. There are a bunch of
That's
these
right.
areas where even what he wants to do, the Republicans, in many ways, one of the reasons they're standing down is because if they show up, the only thing they actually can do that would move things forward is release the Epstein files. But by stepping away, they're counting on almost just as much as Democrats in many ways on the system itself keeping Trump from going too far with this stuff. A lot of it's blather, called renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War and that kind of stuff. Like it materially has no real impact. I mean, financially, that's money that's gone, and is Besant paying off his buddies, but still, that it's he does not have as much rope as he thinks he does, and everybody's kind of like stepping back, waiting for him to run out, like a dog racing to the end of the yard with a chain on. Eventually, gack, it pulls him back, and the only thing that could let him off the chain is a new legal precedent where there's legally a situation. I got a message, I guess. A new legal precedent caused by action. So somebody shoots somebody at one of these gatherings. Somebody actively sets fire to it, and they have some way that they can. Nowadays, there's video proof of somebody doing it, which it wouldn't be enough if a building just caught fire for everybody to, that was the reason to invade someplace, almost like Kent State. You'd need video of it. You'd need, before like the city and the state would stand down enough to say, okay, well, this is serious, right? They just aren't going to just fall for it right away. So there is this element where there, when we say like, use the system that works and don't let him teach you that it doesn't work to provoke you into doing something that he will use to use the real legal mechanisms of the system itself to change his strategy and be able to attack people. Like that's
I
part
don't
of the
put it
conversation.
past them. I
No.
don't put it past them, especially with Stephen Miller in such control, at creating a false impression of what's actually happening. I mean, they're using the word insurrection
Yeah.
ironically so freely, and it's really important to understand what the Insurrection Act actually is. It's the only statute that actually does allow a president to deploy troops domestically without the state's consent.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, it's only been used one time, and that was actually to protect civil rights marchers. And but what it's exactly what Trump should have imposed when there was an actual insurrection on January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
Those insurrectionists, of course, he has hailed for bravery and thought that, and for heroism,
Yeah.
and thinks that they deserve presidential medals. He hails the true insurrectionists, but he's constantly
Mm-hmm.
using the term insurrection now,
Right.
without recognizing that. And that's why I think I value so much these young voices that are
Mm-hmm.
working very hard to talk about what the Posse Comitatus Act actually
Yeah.
is.
Right.
It exists for that kind of reason, to keep the military from being used as a police force against citizens. And that's precisely what's happening, and why we do a lot of training with young student activists on spotting agent provocateurs,
Mm-hmm.
taking out your video when you see violence among your ranks, because there's a good chance it's going to be somebody who wants to brand you as violent when you're not being violent,
Right.
somebody that wants to give a reason for someone to use excessive force against you or to hurt you. And so we train them to report that, and we've done that in local protests as well, where we alert people to those that don't seem to belong with us, and they aren't using the tactics that are part of our plan.
Right.
And it's more to protect people from the kind of harm we saw in 1970.
Right. And I mean it. obviously that wisdom comes with age aspect of it is when you've been through something like that and you recognize that, in the beginning you almost can't believe that anybody wouldn't be on your side, that they wouldn't believe in what you believe, and if they're sitting there, they must, or marching with you, they must be on your side. But then we have entered this era of, Black Bloc and Patriot Front and all these people who mask up to hide themselves. The idea that the regime is going to come down on them, using that as an excuse, which sounds reasonable, to hide their face, to hide who they are. And therefore, while that might be kind of basically reasonable and you can understand where somebody might be coming from in that situation, it also sets up a situation. The system in place then is that anybody who wants to can dress like you and walk into
Mhm.
the crowd and do whatever they want. And that is the nature of the problem with, Black Bloc in general. And there, we even have, Trump talking about, when they're bringing around cans of soup, that whole thing.
And when they get
Yes.
caught, they say, no, this is just soup for my family.
Right. That was the whole,
Big bags of soup. And they lay it on the ground, and the anarchists take it and they start throwing it at our cops, at our police.
right. So they're throwing cans of soup, and why?
That's better than a brick because you can't throw a brick, it's too heavy.
That's right. So they throw they bring bags of soup that they throw on the ground. Everybody throws cans of soup because you can't throw a brick because it's too heavy. And that's what people in Black Bloc do. Now, that to me sounds like a recipe for a Patriot Front or a Proud Boy with Roger Stone's phone
Mhm.
number on his cell phone to go, all right, I'm walking up now, and then chuck the thing, start the stuff off, go, yeah, get him, and then go, okay, I'm clear, and then the word comes to do whatever, like that, to rush the crowd, beat people up, shoot them, that kind of, like, it's too easy. That's the part of it. And that's why the activism, at Kent State, one of the reasons it's such an honorable day for the people who were involved is because you showed your faces. You were you. You were saying you were there because you believed in what you were talking about. And it's a very distinct difference. And I think it's not just valuable for the very reason that you stand up for what you believe in and you show yourself. This is not like voting in private. This is activism is voting in public. And I think that really is what it is. It's the reveal of this is my voting pattern. I'm here to show up for my voting pattern. That would be it.
It's funny to infuse the conversation with talk of Roger Stone. I've often wondered, like, where is this guy? Because whenever I see these thugs with masks and
Mhm.
hoods on, it makes me wonder why they aren't like we are when we're in the streets, ready to show our face because we want people to know who we are and why we are speaking out
Right.
against any injustice that we see. The fact that they hide is reminiscent of what the Klan does. They put
Mhm.
hoods over their faces because they don't want to be seen, because what they're doing is illegal or likely illegal or unconstitutional, which we see the courts say time and again. So much of what ICE is doing is not legal. And it makes me wonder, where is Roger Stone in all this? And where are all of those freed insurrectionists?
Right.
And whether or not they are among these thugs, whether
Mhm.
they aren't part of some kind of militia, a
Mhm.
recruited clandestine militia. We need to see their faces to know that that is not what's happening in America,
That's right.
that these aren't people that were recruited because they are prone to violence and ready to act against their fellow citizens, as they were and proved themselves to be on January 6th. And
Right.
now they're free. Where are they? Are they part of that mass mob? I'm not, trying to promote a conspiracy theory. I'm just saying I want to know they're not. I want to know
Right.
that they're actually people that are employed by the federal government. And if so, I mean, when a policeman stops us, we're entitled to see their badge, their name, and to ask them who they are and to see their credentials before we
Right.
do anything that they tell us to do. I just think we're far too into this to not be questioning all the time why the hoods are necessary and why the masks are necessary.
I think there's
Um,
there's
are
threefold.
they hiding?
Yeah, I think there's threefold reasons why because I never try to look for a binary or singular issue, and I think there's a few of them. One is there are a good number of the people who were already in ICE when all this nonsense started, who've been working there for years, who would rather not show their face, even though they've been assigned to this work. Like they have to do what they're told, or they'll lose their job, their pension, their future, and they'll be ostracized and damaged in their communities and that kind of stuff. So they have to stand there, in front of a facility or walk people out, do their regular job, but under this weird paramilitary, umbrella that Trump insists on it having. And so they cover their faces because they're ashamed to be there. The other ones is because it would not only be what they do might turn out to be illegal later, and they can go, well, I wasn't there. That was somebody had my badge number. I wasn't me. That kind of thing, where they can find a weasel legal way out of it, perhaps. But I also think it's because it's not particularly popular, even in their own homes, even in their own neighborhoods. And if their mother, their wife, their brother, their sister, or whoever, or husband saw their face and went, that was fucking you? What were you doing? I saw you manhandling that kid and zip tying their hands. What the hell's wrong with you? Right? That's the other thing. Like, they're embarrassed to do the job that they're doing, even if they like it, because they know their family will get on them about it. There's a bunch of reasons in there. By the way, they're having, this should, I think, help people feel a little bit better. ICE is having a hard time recruiting people. This is the current $50,000 signing bonus, $60,000 of student loan repayment, and 25% premium pay over whatever other thing. And you could choose your mission. You could be a criminal investigator. You could be a general attorney. They need people who, one of the things that they were looking for were people to this is the GLP, criminal investigator. So apparently, just so we get this right, there are 25 million illegals who came into this country under Joe Biden, who have been here, and they all came from asylums and mental institutions and insane asylums, and they came in on a water slide straight out of jail off the death row. They just dumped everybody in the United States, right? Crazy people. 25 million sociopaths and psychopaths walking around with butcher knives and erections, just going door to door, right? 25 million. But they can't find them. Apparently, they can find like one person who's already been arrested for these kind of things and's been in jail, and they pick that person up and deport them. But they can't. They're running people down for people who either done their time for whatever they did, and they just go, well, you're a convicted felon, so therefore bad. And, even if you cleaned up your act or whatever. But certainly, there's 25 million, but they need investigators to come here and figure out what they did. Like, can you find us some people to deport, please? This is my favorite one is, this role requires no college degree and offers up to $50,000 in signing and retention bonuses. If you're bold, analytical, and ready to make a difference, join HSI and become a vital part of Homeland Security. The job is open to the public. Anybody, come on. You want to know where those Jan 6ers are? That's where they are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, but a lot of them probably don't have student loan debt. They probably didn't go to school.
Right.
Is my concern. But there's an irony in the very people who opposed and stopped public service loan forgiveness for true public service.
Yeah.
Are probably the ones that are supporting this bribe of people to let us pay off your student loan debt, and we'll make you one of our thugs, one of our hooligans. It's going to go out and round up average Americans illegally, and then we'll hide you so that you aren't ostracized by sane people who see the insanity in all of this.
Right. Exactly.
The world is such a crazy, dire strait every day.
I got to say, though, in all fairness, it never hasn't been. And especially as someone who was at Kent State, I think you're fundamentally aware that we're in a constant gardening situation, not an episodic television series where there's, a cliffhanger, and maybe one day Fox and Scully will get together, and that'll be then happily ever after. The X-Files will become the Love Files, right? I just feel like that once you're aware of that, it takes a lot of the sort of not concern, but like the anxiety the hyper worry, the what I call worry weaponized imagination. When someone takes your imagination and all the wonder that it can create and then makes it focus on the worst possible outcome over and over and over again. And that's what Trump is trying to do. It's how he got elected with his own people. He made them worry about these 25 million maniacs that were, going, door to door with a chainsaw and Viagra. And they're coming to your house next, right? That's what he sold them. That's weaponized imagination. He's taking their imagination, going, how can I throw a bit in its mouth and ride this thing to victory? And that's what he did. And so I refuse to be kind of like a willing participant in that part of it, especially because he cannot be shamed. He's never ashamed of anything because he doesn't have any empathy. Shame requires empathy. You have to feel you've done wrong, recognize you've done wrong, recognize how that might feel, and you have to be able to absorb that. That's what shame is. He can be embarrassed, though. He can have his ego checked and challenged. And so that's why the mockery works way better than the outrage. That when people have silly signs or bring up the Epstein list or put up statues of him and Epstein in D.C., it's way more, like he apparently threw a fit in the White House about that statue and like was basically rubbing his hands together about Portland, protesters. Portland protesters showing up, throwing stuff and yelling stuff and all that kind of stuff. He's like, here it comes. We're going to be able to use this. It's going to be sweet. But the statue of him holding hands with Jeffrey Epstein, like they're in The Sound of Music, he was throwing a fit. So that's a lesson in what, in the impact. Do you think maybe that's part of what we have to take in this? Like what version of activism can have the most impact on the cause you're trying to implement, right?
Well, I think that they're aware, and that's why they're cracking down on dissent so much. Well, I agree that if things were just as crazy or crazy in similar ways 55 years ago during the anti-war movement, what we had was a different kind of press, and we had respect for the press. We didn't have a president that was calling the press the enemy of the people. Mm-hmm. And you had the most trusted man in America, his title, Walter Cronkite, at CBS Evening News, that was going through what we were going through as college students. Right. We were being lied to about what that war was about. And we were exposed to those lies when our own friends came back from that war and said, I'm not over there fighting for anything I believe in. Mm-hmm. We're not over there doing what they're telling us what we're doing. Like we're doing some pretty awful stuff. Mm-hmm. And it took a Walter Cronkite to leave his news desk, put on a helmet and a flak jacket and go over there and come back and tell the truth that This is an unwinnable war and 58,000 young men died for nothing. And I think that the powers that be learned from that, and that is why we have corporate control of media, and that is why we have people in media that are, supporting the lie and propping up the lies, and just even that spectacle in front of the militaries to learn that Fox News, instead of showing the stunned silence of a crowd that watched Trump and Hegseth make such fools of themselves, added canned laughter. Did you read that?
Yeah.
They added canned sitcom laughter mm-hmm. to remove the uncomfortableness when Trump himself said, he expressed surprise that they were so silent.
Right.
They were stunned at what they were seeing the commander-in-chief and the Secretary of Defense doing in front of this crowd, literally conditioning them for war against the American people. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was no laughter in that room.
No.
But to have a media today that cans laughter mm-hmm. because they're uncomfortable themselves with that stunned silence, they did not get the real message or the real news that came out of that meeting.
Not at all. And in all fairness, I will often throw in canned laughter over Trump talking just because I actually think that's the response that should be happening in cabinet meetings in general. When he's like, I've been talking to Bobby Kennedy for 20 years about vaccines. I think there's like a jar of water. You're putting that in a baby's head. You should do that. Don't take Tylenol. Don't do it. Right. I think there's an element where it has its place, just for me. But you're absolutely right, and that's where, like, I think again, the youngins on the YouTube are great at that part of it as well. And there's a real trend I'm seeing, and it's almost like this mid zone where, if you came out of the era, that you're kind of talking about, especially around Nixon and the like, is that there's incredible value put on political comedy, especially post Lenny Bruce, where people recognized what they'd lost and what had happened to him. And so, even though, by the way, he said some sketchy shit, like on the regular, obviously, but the value that the lead off that gave Richard Pryor and George Carlin and others in Godfrey Cambridge and to come out and say stuff that they might have not said before had more of an impact on had almost an equal amount of an impact on Nixon, along with the Watergate story, that he was becoming not just a pariah but also a joke. Like, he was being used to make the Republican Party a punchline, was one of the reasons why they were moving him. Some of them were morally opposed to what he was doing, or thought he would limit their power for the next 10 years if he continued, and they would have been right, I think. But they also were tired of hearing jokes about him. I'm not a crook. That kind of business, like that got thrown into their face, and that's their guy. And there's an old phrase, silly song did more to bring down the king than did all the protestations of the bishops, which is this idea that, like, Catholics and Protestants were in the streets pushing back against, the king, and it had almost no impact because he was like, haha, they fear me. That's why they're yelling so loudly. Whereas they started singing this song about him in all the pubs, and he became a punchline. And that was the end of it. That was what ultimately brought him down. And so there's an element of that with Trump, is that, and I know, like, the idea that Stephen Miller being kind of, and I'm sure you saw his freeze up on the news the other day, when he said that the president had plenary power, which means absolute power over the military, which is ridiculous. Like, it's absurd in every way. Like, it's, he froze up in saying, I'll see if I can find the actual clip of it, which is this idea. There we go. Pausing here. And that he just, like, at one point, the host is like, Stephen?
Overseeing this case.
And they act like it's a tech issue, right? In reality, he realized he had said plenary power, and it was like, oops. That's monarchical.
No, but it's exactly the way he sees things. He does.
Yes.
He does believe in authoritarian rule. He's the architect of the dictatorship and the carry out of Project 2025. And he is not Trump, but he is the spokesperson for Trump. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if he's also not the one that's writing the tweets and so forth that perpetrate this myth that Trump has total control of everything, and including the judiciary. That to see Stephen Miller, at the heart of the incitement against federal judges, when a Molotov cocktail lands on a judge's doorstep, responsibility doesn't just lie with the person who firebombs. It lies with those people who put the judge. I mean, you're hiding the faces of ICE, but you're displaying the faces of judges whose rulings disagree. They're conditioning Americans to see our courts, our judges, as enemies. I mean, it's the only branch of government now that is still even protecting cities like Portland and Chicago. But you've got people like Stephen Miller in the pulpit of political power. Just his message is only that the strong, the powerful, not the law, should prevail. And it makes me sick when political leaders who escalate this kind of rhetoric feign surprise when there's something like a shooting at the home of a state legislator or a firebombing at a judge's house. And the fact that we're not holding that rhetoric and the people spewing it accountable for striking the matches of these firebombs, there's something wrong with that, because truth is under siege, and the courts are really the only institution still capable of saying no to power and meaning it. I just can't get out of my mind that this this home of this judge burnt to the ground,
Right.
you know, and Stephen Miller's and Trump were calling for the impeachment as retribution for judges.
Mhm.
You know, Miller all over the right wing shows social media framing judicial decisions as legal insurrection,
Mhm.
implicitly casting judges as traitors
Right.
rather than neutral arbiters of the law.
Yeah, he had
It's
mentioned. Yeah, he had mentioned
unbelievable.
that he kept saying this is an insurrection in his description in one interview, I think with Greg Kelly, on Newshacks, where he was like, what we have, these judges have aren't doing their job. That's an insurrection. The idea that they aren't prosecuting the people I think they should be prosecuting, or they haven't for years, is an insurrection. Like there's something such as a slow boil insurrection is the idea. That's what he's trying to sell.
They want to erode the power of the judiciary because they already have the power of the legislative branch with Republican control of the House and Senate. You got Jordan referring to judges' rulings as stupid, and you got, who is it, Andrew Clyde and Andy Ogles. They actually filed formal resolutions to impeach judges who are blocking portions of Trump's agenda. And then you got Mike Lee, who's I think the worst among them, Josh Hawley, Chuck Grassley, who's just needs to go home. Trying to strip judges.
I think I've got a lot of reason to be here right now. I think these young whippersnappers, but can someone tell me? I've lost my password, and every time I can open my phone with either my face or my scrotum. It doesn't seem to matter. They seem to be both exactly alike according to the facial recognition. We got to get these tech billionaires in here to discuss this.
This guy is at the heart of trying to get a bill passed that would strip courts of doing nationwide injunctions against the kind of military takeover that they're deploying to our American cities. So if you know that you don't have the law on your side, you just simply block enforcement of the law, and you use congressional power to do so, or else you just incite people to take care of those judges that are stopping them from breaking the law and violating the Constitution. It's
thank you so much for
crazier.
There seems to be
crazier.
I'm going to show you this if I can. Let me open it on another page so it's easier. This is where Stephen Miller says that Trump has plenary authority.
Thank you so much for joining us, by the way. You've called the district judge's ruling blocking the deployment of National Guard in Oregon legal insurrection. Does the administration still plan to abide by that ruling?
Well, the administration filed an appeal this morning with the Ninth Circuit. I would note the administration won an identical case in the Ninth Circuit just a few months ago with respect to the federalizing of the California National Guard. Under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, the president has plenary authority.
Stephen? Stephen? Hey, Stephen, can you hear me? It seemed, Stephen, I apologize. It seems like we're having a technical issue.
He had an issue, sorry.
We'll try to fix that.
I added that like Fox added a laugh track to Trump's jokes. I just needed that right for myself. But that is plenary authority is a legalese way of saying absolute power. That he can determine what words mean, an emergency, an insurrection, right? He can make up what they mean. It's up to him. And then he can act on that definition. And a great example of that is deciding that cartels are not just drug trafficking organizations, illegal, mafia-like structures and whatever. They are terrorist organizations. Therefore, we're killing terrorists when we kill a drug dealer. Anybody associated with them, anybody working with them, anybody who, rolls blunts for them. That's a criminal terrorist, right? Seriously. And they, and if we shoot somebody on a street corner who's selling drugs, that's a terrorist. And that's where they're moving with this language. And when they insist they have plenary authority, and this is all, by the way, this isn't necessarily new. It's just coming home, because this is the same shit we had under, enhanced interrogation and the John Yoo memo and Dick Cheney, and I've made the case. This is kind of like the, inciting a riot so that you can shoot back intentionally, which was, it's something that Paul Manafort did in Ukraine on behalf of the government there. That was his idea, to put snipers in the towers and send agent provocateurs into the crowd in Euromaidan. The people that died in Ukraine on Euromaidan were killed at the direction of and from the ideas of Paul Manafort, who went on to work for Trump for free twice. And has his own like Epstein-esque sketchy stuff, where he would hire men off of Craigslist to have sex with his incapacitated wife while he watched. And his own daughters won't talk to him ever again. Is a terrible, terrible human being on a scale that's hard to fathom. These are the kind of ideas that come from him and the Stephen Millers of the world. But what they want is trigger this so our response is legal. Because we can't redefine everything. We can't. Somebody in an inflatable dinosaur suit, no matter what we do, is not an insurrectionist. It just doesn't fly. If we want to still have courts, and that's, debatable, or if we want to live in Escape from New York, is really, is their dream idea of what America should be like, then, we're going to have to at least pretend to give lip service to it, right? But they want these things kicked off because he really thinks Trump has the ability to decide what words mean. And anytime those words have been used to justify an action in the past, those things with their changed definition can now be used to justify actions in the present. And I would agree that I would argue that the same thing is true of, illegals in this country, that people who had their temporary protected status turned off yesterday or their asylum claim rejected are currently in America illegally as criminals from that second forward, according to this administration, and don't have time to either leave on their own or appeal or any of that stuff. They're just criminals. That's the way they're using the language because of what you can do to a criminal, what you can do to a terrorist.
Didn't it look like somebody was talking in his ear?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I got that impression that somebody said, no, don't go there. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like you can't say plenary. But what he was doing was just basically saying that the president has the authority to violate the Constitution at will, particularly
Right.
when it comes to immigration. He can
Yeah.
just decide who's American and who's not American. And if
Right.
you're not American, you don't belong here. Either you're going to be shipped out or something worse will happen to you. You just don't belong here. I mean, that's a frightening possibility, but it's a frightening disclosure that is what they're aiming at, and that's what they're all about. It should be. I just don't understand why that is not broadcast everywhere. That freeze
Right.
up. I'd really like to know who was talking in his ear. It looked very much like he was listening, not just keeping himself in check, because he would have come in with, well, what I meant was, and he wasn't. He was listening to something. And
Mm-hmm.
it's spooky. This whole shadow president and clandestine operation. Like, what are they doing behind the scenes? It's bad enough what we see in plain sight.
Well, I would say that, but I don't know that if Trump was doing the thinking all on his own, it would be any better. As a matter of fact, I would argue it would be, it materially worse just because he's so, everything he does is based on impulse now, right? Everything
Or
is
on
just,
his self-profit, how he can profit.
right.
He's all about his horses. He's all about his real estate. He's all about his money.
Yes.
We've known that forever. He really doesn't want to be a president. He just wants the power, the title, the glory,
Right.
the humor of walking out.
Oh, yeah.
with
All the
his
people
wife.
who are like Trump 2028 or whatever. I'm like, you guys have no idea. This dude it can't wait to leave you suckers behind and just, build a crypto, tech idiot financial, like FinSec bullshit paper tiger, that Don Jr. and Eric run. They're not doing any fucking building after this. They're not going to do more golf courses and hotels or any of that stuff. They're just going to do crypto and money laundering for real. Like that's, and then he'll own golf courses as, like Walter White owned car washes. Right?
Well, and look what he's done to the White House. I mean,
Yeah.
as his own personal real estate. Who would ever want to live in that,
Yeah, it's hilarious.
gilded
Well, it's like, yeah,
it's
I mean, like it's embarrassing enough when Vladimir Putin walks out of those giant doors and looks like the smallest toy in a wind-up clock. Like he looks like a cuckoo, like all hail Admiral Cuckoo, and it's like, and this like,
and sits at that table at the far end of the table.
oh yeah.
Big
Well, you would too
table.
if your regular way of handling things was to spray shit in people's faces and push them out a window. I don't know that you're not going to be able to glad hand with very many people. And the only ones who are going to be able to, those people are probably like, do I dare touch his hand? God knows what kind of like weird chemical they've come up with that he's built up an immunity to, and and he's going to kill me with it. That was one of the concerns about the handshake with Trump, that Trump had, was that Trump's been on a hard fade for a while, so maybe people wouldn't notice, but it's not good. Like it very well, like it wouldn't shock me then. Oh yeah, he shook hands with him, and it got a little pin in his hand, and that was that. And now he's got it triggered his fifth stage syphilis or whatever it pushed him to the next level of whatever brain worm. It gave him a copy of Bobby F. Kennedy Jr.'s brain worm. It was like they injected him with a new brain worm. The problem is it would probably make him smarter. So I don't know that would be the case. I think it's debatable. But while like we got just a couple minutes left or whatever, I know that you teach in the like, and like, do you have a podcast of your own on the regular that you do, or anything similar to that people can tune into?
No, I'm busy teaching,
Right.
and I I'm a more get in the streets kind of person than
Yeah.
pontificating. I do. I mean, I have. I'm an old timer. At the age of 75, I still have a Facebook page that
Hmm.
I rarely put anything that has to do with family and
Right.
what my new drapes or what I'm
Hmm.
eating for dinner tonight. It's a political column, that
Hmm.
pushes out to Instagram and things like that. I'm always just trying to make sense of things for my friends, and I do so with caution.
Hmm.
We live in Ohio here, with Senate Bill 1 having a major chilling effect on what we say and do on a college campus. I'm still
Hmm.
an American citizen. I have a, you know, I have a right to speak to you today, and I have a right to my
Right.
opinions about what's going on. And I'm known for having an opinion about things. As an anti-war protester 55 years ago, that's very proud that we spoke out against an immoral war. And in the 6 weeks following the shootings at Kent State, although we suffered a major loss on that day, it put 5 million people in the streets, where I want to be and where I think my generation needs to be,
Hmm.
out there with young people today,
Yep.
demanding an end to injustice and the erosion of our democracy. And so, no, I'm overdue. It's one of the things on my list, but I'm very, very busy teaching, and I'm doing a lot of writing. I'm working on my brother's memoir, which he passed away before
Yeah.
publishing, and I'm working this week
Yeah.
actually with his
Alan.
former. Yeah,
He passed
Alan.
away
And
in 2020. Yeah.
he passed away in 2020. His roommate, Tom Grace, was also wounded at Kent State with him.
Hmm.
So Tom and I have the awesome responsibility to make sure that Alan's memoir is published. And so Tom is actually arriving today at 5 o'clock. He's spending the weekend here because we're attending a memorial service for one of our SDS colleagues from 1970.
Awesome.
And so that's my work right now. A lot of writing, a lot of teaching, um, and just a lot of talking and a lot of getting in the streets, so that I believe there is still strength in numbers,
I
and
agree.
making sure that we protect young people from the kinds of agent provocateurs, or the false flags that paint honest dissent and righteous dissent as violence or insurrection. The rhetoric has to stop, and we just have to show that is not who we are in America.
Hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on today. And I know, one of the things that the Trump administration is trying to scare people away from gathering or speaking up, and for fear that, again, like somebody will set something off and it'll turn into something awful and the like. But I think again and again people are showing that as they show up, as they participate, as they do this, that they become less afraid, and they recognize that it is having an impact on not just their own lives and building community that, you know, and shared purpose, and recognize there are people out there that also care about what you care about, but also his poll numbers. It's impacting his poll numbers as well, because people recognize, you know, what side, you know, they're having to face what side they're going to be on. So I greatly appreciate you being on the show, and you're welcome back anytime.
Well, the No Kings protests, every time I attend one, I see people saying it's their first time.
Yeah.
And it's where they're learning. And there's you know, they just keep coming back, and they're getting bigger and stronger. And I hope people don't just pass those up on social media. It's a reminder to us that our ranks are growing. We really are the silent majority today. Majority of people do oppose the policies of this repressive government, this authoritarian rule. The Stephen Millers and all of that are truly a minority. They do not represent the American people. So we've got to, you know, I believe, show our strength in numbers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. I'll see you again. All right. Awesome.
I will see you.
Thank you. There she goes, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Chic Canfora. So fantastic. And I have to say, like, one of the things that they will try to take from you in these situations is your composure. I know it seems like a strange thing to, you know, to like, you know, recognize as a tool of your capability, but it absolutely is. Because if basically everything Trump is doing is an outrage farm, then you have to recognize the way you starve that beast is to not give it its grazing crop. As much as it might seem right and normal, and it would, and when you see something, if somebody was marching against you, it would make you feel uneasy and uncomfortable, and like if they were screaming, you know, violent things. That's not the way they react to it. They look at it as opportunity. So if somebody tries to turn you into an outrage farm, deny them the crop. Yeah. Anyways, you guys are awesome. Take care of yourselves and take care of somebody else. And I will see you guys this afternoon.